We must commence this exploration not with a tender caress, but with a confession both stark and terrifying. The past is not a foreign country. It is the very crypt from which we cannot escape. We stand, perpetually bound, by the fragile, yet unbreakable threads woven during those initial years, that brief, bewildering span we call childhood, the hook and the shadow. Tell me, my astute, and perhaps slightly melancholic companion, do you truly believe that innocence is the defining feature of those nascent years? Or is it merely the profound lack of responsibility, a vacuum quickly filled by observation, fear, and a terrifying ability to absorb darkness without the adult lexicon to name it? We speak of childhood as a lost Eden, yet I argue it is often the most meticulously planned ruin, a psychological architecture designed to collapse inward precisely when we seek to build our adult lives upon its foundations. Observe the irony. We chase tranquility and clarity in our waking hours, only to be systematically dismantled by sleep. For it is in the shadowed theater of the dream state that the true masters of our destiny reveal themselves, not the specters of future dread, but the relentless, persistent, small phantoms of our former selves. These are the eidolons of our first sorrows, the echoes of whispered threats, the scent of dust and rain on a specific forgotten afternoon. They pull us, relentlessly, back toward the temporal gravity well of our origins. This is the nature of our dark inquiry today, to dissect the perpetual, hypnotic pull of the past. It is an influence that transcends simple memory. It is a contagion of the spirit, a subtle, sepulchral music that dictates the rhythm of our anxiety and the shape of our deepest desires. We are not merely remembering childhood, we are being haunted by it. Consider the vast, labyrinthine network of the mind. The adult memory, the one we manipulate and boast about, is a curated library, well-lit, and often deceptively organized. But the memory of childhood, particularly the one that intrudes upon our slumber, is the forgotten subterranean level, damp, ill-marked, filled with forgotten trinkets, that, upon inspection, prove to be objects of immense and terrible power. Why does the visual palette of a forgotten bedroom, or the distinct texture of a worn wooden floor, resurface with such visceral reality decades later? Because these seemingly trivial data points were absorbed without the filter of adult cynicism or critical analysis. They entered the soul raw, unadulterated, and consequently gained a power over us that no subsequent, rationally processed memory can ever match. It is this specific, unfiltered ingestion of reality that makes the influence of the earliest years so pernicious, yet so essential to understand. We are seeking the signature of the ghost that shares our waking light, the unseen hand that tugs at the drapery of our emotional stability. We must descend, together, into the swirling darkness of the maelstrom of the self, to confront not the events we merely recall, but the atmospheric pressures that fundamentally deformed, or perhaps exquisitely refined, the clay of our identity. The journey is necessary. For every great tragedy and every sublime triumph gains, in a cradle shrouded by shadow and defined by the things left unsaid. We shall peel back the layers of this existential palimpsest, revealing the original, terrifying text written upon our souls before we even knew how to read. The atmosphere is established. The descent awaits. The descent into the maelstrom begins when we accept that the past does not merely inform our present. It actively creates the filters through which all present reality must pass. If the introduction was the establishing of the ghost, this deeper phase must identify the material of the shroud, the very fabric of the haunting. The child is a sensorium of raw data, a highly sophisticated, yet utterly defenseless, mechanism for absorption. Every inflection of tone, every shadow cast by an unlit hallway, every sustained silence in a room heavy with unspoken tension, these are not passing moments. They are carefully filed records, awaiting the recall subpoena decades later, usually in the most vulnerable hours of the night. We must consider the architecture of childish perception. The world is gargantuan, unpredictable, often terrifyingly indifferent. The lack of control fosters a continuous state of low-grade metaphysical anxiety. When an event occurs, be it a misunderstanding, a moment of profound loneliness, or even a fleeting instance of pure, unadulterated joy, it is processed without the intellectual ballast of context. The adult can rationalize suffering. This relationship failed because of mutually incompatible goals. The child, encountering abandonment or confusion, rationalizes inwardly. This pain exists because of me. This is the genesis of our deepest, most insidious self-doubt. The child becomes the central, yet unreliable, narrator of their own fledgling existence, assigning cosmic significance to parental mood shifts and interpreting silence as impending doom. This distorted lens is carried forward, a subtle, refractive error in the eye of the soul, ensuring that every subsequent relationship, every professional challenge, is viewed, at least initially, through the heavy, darkening glass of that original, fundamental insecurity. The dream state, that desolate moor of consciousness, is where this psychological sediment is stirred. The dreams that pull us are rarely literal reconstructions of past events. They are, instead, distillations of emotion. You do not dream of the specific conversation. You dream of the feeling of being unable to speak, the stifling pressure that accompanied the silence. You do not dream of the face. You dream of the profound, chilling sense of isolation that faced once provoked. This is the enduring mechanism of the childhood maelstrom. It sucks the adult self down, not through brute force of memory, but through the irresistible, gravity-like pull of an unprocessed emotional charge. Why does this pull remain so potent? Because the adult self, in its quest for stability and professional competence, attempts to wall off these subterranean feelings. We build magnificent fortresses of logic and routine, yet these early, undigested emotional responses act like hairline fractures in the foundation. A stressful meeting, a minor rejection, a sudden change in routine, these are merely slight pressures on the fortress. But the crack widens, and through it seeps the atmosphere of the past. Suddenly, the adult, capable and seasoned, experiences a moment of terror that is disproportionate to the current stimulus. A terror that belongs to a 5-year-old hiding beneath a blanket. The feeling is authentic, even if the context is borrowed. This proves that the childhood self is not merely a memory, but a cohabitant, a nervous tenant who occasionally seizes control of the emotional thermostat. We are perpetually engaged in a silent, internal conflict, wrestling with the phantom limbs of our history. We must now turn our attention to how these unseen conflicts betray themselves. The subtle thrumming beneath the floorboards of our composure, the heart delator of our hidden suffering. The presence of the concealed past is most frequently betrayed not by conscious recollection, but by the nervous tremors and sudden, inexplicable chills that arrest the heart in moments of quiet reflection. This is the heart delator, the incessant, rhythmic pounding of the buried truth beneath the floorboards of our carefully constructed adult fact. It is the psychosomatic echo of traumas great and small, the physical manifestation of psychological debt we have yet to settle. How does this inner spy reveal itself? Through the compulsion to repeat patterns we know to be destructive, a perverse fidelity to the architecture of our initial suffering. If our first profound emotional landscape was defined by unpredictability, we may subconsciously seek partners or environments that offer the same thrilling, terrifying instability, mistaking anxiety for passion, or familiarity for true connection. We are drawn back to the scene of the crime, not to solve it, but perhaps, in some dark corner of the psyche, to finally understand why we were victimized, or perhaps why we were complicit in our own misfortune. The heart delator also speaks through our self-sabotage de Sadan, illogical reluctance to seize success, the baffling decision to burn bridges just as they lead to salvation. This is often the inner child, afraid of the unfamiliar luminosity of happiness, returning to the comforting gloom of what it knows best: struggle, complication, and eventual defeat. Success, for the perpetually haunted, feels like a betrayal of the original landscape of scarcity and pain. It is an uncomfortable brilliance, demanding a new self that the deeply rooted childhood self refuses to recognize or sustain. The haunting is not just sorrow, it is also the fear of resolution. And yet, this constant, wearying struggle is what binds us, spectators, to this dark confessional. If you, in this shared silence, feel the prickle of recognition, if a sudden, cold wave washes over you, suggesting that your adult anxieties are merely costumes worn by infantile fears, then you are precisely where you need to be. The descent requires courage, and the recognition of the binding chains is the first step toward mapping the escape route, or at least naming the captor. If this spectral analysis, this autopsy of the living soul, resonates with the hidden currents in your own psychological stream, I implore you, grant this spectral broadcast a small tribute of your digital affirmation. Subscribe, if you dare, to this ongoing chronicle of the human shadows, and press the digital approval to signal that the silence of your own past has been broken by this shared inquiry. Let us know that others walk this dark path, so that we may light the way for those still stumbling in the outer darkness. The self-betrayal of the heart delator is merely preparation for the next stage, The confrontation with the enigma, the riddle of how seemingly neutral elements from our past wield such disproportionate influence over our future. We must now move beyond the emotional symptoms and analyze the mechanics of the haunting itself. What is the fundamental, often overlooked, source of this power? It resides in the very essence of human ambiguity and the terror of the incomplete narrative. We now approach the core riddle, the enigma that prevents our complete emancipation from the nursery of sorrows, the overwhelming power of the unfinished narrative. Childhood experiences, particularly those that carry an intense emotional charge, rarely arrive with resolution or satisfying closure. They are fragments of a shattered mirror, reflecting distortion without providing the final, unifying image. An adult trauma, while debilitating, often has a defined beginning and end, a framework for intellectual processing. The trauma of the child is diffuse, ongoing, and, critically, unexplained. Consider the simple, yet profound, terror of the omission, parent's sudden, cold withdrawal, a sibling's cryptic cruelty, a teacher's unexpected public shaming. The child lacks the philosophical framework to understand why. Was it exhaustion? Marital stress? A lapse of judgment? To the child, the absence of explanation forces the creation of an immediate, often self-incriminating narrative. Since no external reason is provided for the perceived injustice, the reason must, inevitably, be internal. I am flawed. I deserved this withdrawal. I am fundamentally inadequate. This manufactured narrative, born from necessity and cemented by fear, becomes the bedrock of the enigma. The power of this specific haunting lies precisely in its incompleteness. The adult self, highly evolved is perpetually driven to fill the void, to complete the circuit of past suffering. We drag these fragmented episodes, these psychological ghosts, into our current relationships and endeavors, seeking not necessarily happiness, but resolution. We hope that a loving partner will retroactively heal the original wound of abandonment, or that professional excellence will finally silence the whispering voice of inadequacy implanted by a critical caretaker. We are forever trying to use present success as a suture for ancient psychological lacerations. The result is a subtle, corrosive form of transference. We project the features, the anxieties, and the unfinished business of the past onto the innocent canvas of the present. This is why a minor critique from a supervisor can trigger a reaction more appropriate for a parental rebuke, or why a casual disagreement with a spouse can escalate into a primal fear of total isolation. The adult mind is not reacting to the present moment. It is attempting to finally win a debate that occurred 40 years ago, in a room that no longer exists, with people who have long since changed, or perhaps departed entirely. The irony is excruciating. By seeking resolution through projection, we merely succeed in contaminating the present, ensuring that the original suffering is preserved, not solved, in the amber of repetition. To truly grapple with this enigma is to accept that the closure we crave must be generated internally, not extracted externally. The past cannot be rewritten, and the ghosts cannot be forced into a final, satisfying explanation. They must be observed, catalogued, and ultimately deprived of their power to dictate the future. This difficult act of emotional self-autonomy is the precursor to the necessary climax of the Vivenda moment, where we finally confront the harsh wisdom that the haunting itself delivers. We have navigated the treacherous currents of buried feeling and mapped the destructive patterns of repetition. We now arrive at the crucible, the climax of the Ravenda, point of no return, where the haunting must be either defeated or fully embraced. This is not a moment of sudden joy or dramatic release. It is, in the true Poe fashion, a stark, chilling realization of irreversible truth. The raven, perched above the chamber door, famously utters a single, devastating word: nevermore. In the context of our perpetual childhood haunting, this word carries a double-edged implication. Firstly, it pronounces the death of the possibility of rescuda, idea that some external force, some perfect lover, or some ultimate achievement will ride in to retroactively save the child within us. Nevermore will that perfect, resolving closer arrive from the outside. The childhood self must stand alone. Secondly, and more powerfully, nevermore becomes an imperative, a declaration of psychological sovereignty. The past, when finally understood in its full, incomplete terror, ceases to be a predictive model and reverts to what it truly is: history. The moment of climax is when the adult self observes the terrified child within, acknowledges its pain, but refuses to surrender the reins of the present moment to its fears. The power of the past is fundamentally derived from our willingness to treat its anxieties as prophecies. This moment requires a terrifying clarity. We must stop romanticizing the childhood dream and see it for the unpolished, often brutal, apprenticeship that it was. The intense emotional responsiveness of the child was not innocence. It was extreme vulnerability. The profound melancholy we carry is not depth of soul. It is the lingering echo of initial, unrationalized abandonment. The climax is reached when we look into the abyss of that original pain and realize that its influence is sustained only by our continued passive participation in its narrative. The synthesis here is paradoxical. The childhood that pulls us through our dreams is potent precisely because it created the unique sensitivity, the specific capacity for observation, and the profound, melancholic introspection that allows us to undertake this self-dissection now. The suffering that wounded us also created the instrument capable of understanding that wound. The darkness was not merely destructive, it was formative. Therefore, the raven's final wisdom is this: the ghosts will not vanish. The threads of the past will remain interwoven. The challenge is not eradication, but transformation. We must convert the historical fact of our suffering into the modern art of our survival. The memory must become a museum, not a prison cell. The fear must be acknowledged as a former guide, but now deposed by a dull will. This heavy, resonant truth sets the stage for the final philosophical acceptance, the message final, and the legacy we choose to leave behind the closing door of our haunted past. We stand now at the threshold of conclusion, having traversed the subterranean pathways of memory and confronted the spectral architecture of our earliest years. The final wisdom gleaned from this dark pilgrimage is neither simple nor cheerful. It is a profound philosophical resignational legacy of enduring awareness. What remains is the undeniable truth. The childhood that still pulls you through your dreams is, by necessity, the only childhood you will ever possess. It is the unchangeable, defining crucible. Our freedom is not found in forgetting this origin, but in fundamentally altering our relationship to its lingering artifacts. We move from being the effect of the past to becoming the deliberate cause of our future. This requires a perpetual state of vigilance, a continuous, melancholic audit of the self, ensuring that the shadows we cast today are illuminated by our adult resolve, not darkened by ancient, buried fear. The true mastery of self is the ability to maintain complexity, to acknowledge the terrified child without allowing it to drive the carriage of the man. The message is not one of healing in the conventional sense of neat suture and disappearance. It is a message of integration, the melancholy, the exquisite sensitivity, the depth of feeling that drives us to investigate these dark corners. These are the gifts purchased at the high cost of early pain. We must learn to wear our scars not as badges of victimhood, but as maps of resilience, proving that the human spirit, however bruised, can sustain the impossible and emerge with a capacity for insight unmatched by the uninitiated. As we conclude this shared meditation on the persistent pull of the soul's earliest gravity, I ask you, do not let this descent be merely an intellectual exercise. Let the recognition of your haunting be the catalyst for action. The past cannot be undone, but its future iterations in your life can be meticulously dismantled. If this shared exploration has granted you even a sliver of new sight into the subterranean workings of your own history, let the effect linger. If you have felt the cold breath of recognition upon your neck, share this chronicle with others who walk the dim, bewildering paths of self-discovery, and leave your own fragmented narrative in the comments below. Let the conversation continue long after the screen darkens, for it is in the shared darkness that true clarity sometimes resides. The final word belongs to the shadow itself, a somber warning and a necessary truth. You will never truly escape the house of your childhood. It is built within the architecture of your bones. Your only recourse is to become the vigilant inhabitant, a wise, mournful custodian of your own beautiful, terrifying ruins. Never forget, the specter of your youth is the very force that defines a singular, complex creature you have become. And the only thing more tragic than being haunted is to be haunted, yet refuse to look the ghost in the eye.